Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Caen.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
Last week's episode was the second of our two-part series on Jose Mourinho, and we describe how the love bomber turns toxic. It's the story of his fall, and maybe with a little bit of redemption. If you haven't already, please check it out.
Welcome back to Heroes and Humans, where today we are discussing my GOAT, the player I consider to be the greatest of all time, N'Golo Kanté, or NG to his friends. He's a footballer who's won nearly every major accolade in world football. We're doing this episode on N'Golo because it looks like he might have played in his last major tournament with France. He's left European football and is now in Saudi Arabia, so it's a perfect time to look back on all of the qualities that made N'Golo Kanté great. And as we'll discuss in this episode, I think he is a footballer who is in many ways the antithesis of what we consider to be a modern practitioner of the game. Now, Kanté is a player who I will say without any hesitation is the human who resonates with me far beyond football. We're the same age, we are the same height, and we're also the same religion. And of course, he played for my beloved Chelsea up until a few years ago.
Except that you talk all the time and he doesn't talk at all.
I think maybe when God made us, it was really similar. But then when all the talking got dished out, he was at the back of the queue. He got all of the speed, stamina, agility, modesty, humbleness. I didn't get any of that, but I definitely got the motor mouth. You're right.
Yeah.
But we are going to discuss in this episode that for all of those superficialities, N'Golo Kanté means far, far more to me as a person. Who's the little man who never speaks and hides behind this gigantic toothy smile? Why was he overlooked at the top of football for so long, basically breaking into the professional game in his 20s? What makes him special? And I guess above all, Simon, you want to know why do I love him so much?
Not just you. Why is he so many people's favourite player? His former teammate Paul Pogba once said, "You are obliged to love him. I think he is the most beloved footballer in history."
What does that tell us about Kanté? And also about what we expect and want from footballers? How did a man who bucks every cliched stereotype and character trait of a mega-rich footballer come from sweeping streets to collecting nearly every major trophy in the game? First, Simon, some stats.
He's born in 1991 in the greatest city in the world, Paris. He won the Premier League with Leicester in 2016, which is one of the maddest titles in English football history. The next year, he won it with Chelsea, when he's also voted both the players and the football writers Footballer of the Year. He debuted for France only a few days before turning 25. A couple of years later, 2018, he won the World Cup with them. In 2021, he is the main man as Chelsea win the Champions League. And now he plays for Al-Ittihad in the Saudi League.
Simon, you've already mentioned Paris, but how does the young NG grow up?
He's born in Paris, in the city itself, into a family of immigrants from Mali. He's one of 9 children, and they end up living in a small flat in the suburbs of Paris, in a neighborhood called Geraniums. His dad's a garbage collector, his mum's a cleaning lady, and age 7, he sees France win the World Cup in Paris with Zidane, Thuram, and other immigrant kids as the heroes of the day. And he says that's the moment when he decides he wants to be a footballer. I guess he can see a place where a black kid like him can belong and have a place. His dad dies when NG is 11 years old. But beyond that, we know very little about his life because he doesn't seem to exist on social media. He has barely given an interview in his life. And so information on him is bizarrely sparse.
That makes him pretty exceptional among his generation of footballers who have all grown up sharing every snippet of their life on social media. I mean, somebody we've already mentioned, Paul Pogba, is probably as well known on the internet for being an internet guy as he is being a footballer. But there are a couple of things that Kanté has revealed about himself. including the fact that he was named after an ancient Malian king. And to quote NG, he says, "He was a king who started from below to conquer a kingdom. I used to collect garbage before, and today I play football and people watch me on TV." Now, there are some images of the young Kanté who looks like he's collecting rubbish as a young kid, and that seems to have happened after his father passes away, and he's selling these sort of plastics for recycling to earn a little bit of money for his family. However, a lot of things about Kanté's young life is very difficult to verify. If you go on the internet, there's lots of reports that actually he was street sweeping during the 1998 World Cup, but we can't really verify that. That might just be a sort of apocryphal tale that people have put two and two together and come up with five. And most of what we'll tell you in this episode is actually testimonies about Kanté and his character from his fellow players.
Yeah, I've been through the French media, youth coaches, that kind of thing, talking about him. And they describe a kid who sounds a lot like the adult Kanté we know. A head shorter than everyone else, quiet, humble, respectful. A team player from the start. Those are the descriptions that come back again and again. One youth coach says he's the only kid he'd ever seen who never blamed a teammate for anything, never said after a defeat it was his fault. His problem, everyone could see he could play football, but he was only 5'5" tall. And French football in the early 2000s was all about power. You know, midfield had been redefined by Patrick Vieira and Emmanuel Petit, so every club wanted their own Vieira. Short kids were out of fashion, couldn't even get into youth academies. And so Antoine Griezmann, who now plays for France with Kanté, was rejected by 6 French youth academies because he was too small. And so age 14, Griezmann had to go to Real Sociedad in Spain, where they like little kids, to get a chance in pro football. Other little Frenchmen like Franck Ribéry, Mathieu Valbuena also don't get a chance in youth academies. We know how stupid this is because short players have advantages. You can see that watching Kanté and even watching Messi. Short players can stop, turn and change direction faster than big kids. But in the early 2000s, this is not the thinking. And so Kanté is rejected by pro clubs like Rennes and Sochaux. And finally, right at the end, when it seems he's not going to find his place in pro football, he gets an amateur contract with Little Boulogne in the French 3rd division, already aged 19.
And they are also the club that actually give Franck Ribéry his start. So they have a little bit of a tradition of finding the boys that are being rejected for all of their physical traits and making them into greats.
Well, they take these kids partly because Boulogne is really at the bottom of French football. It's this poor coastal town facing the English coast. And so really he's gone from the bottom of French society to the bottom of French football.
While he's at Bologna, Kanté lives in a youth hostel and he's on a pretty modest contract, and sometimes he even has to skip meals. He gets a reputation very quickly in the changing room because he turns up to training on his scooter, holding plastic bags to carry his personal goods. But it was difficult for him to live away from his big family, particularly after his father passes away, and he struggles to get a basic diploma. However, the young Kanté, like a good immigrant kid, is also studying, and eventually after 4 or 5 years he gets his diploma in accounting, just in case football doesn't work out.
At this point, the idea of making it in football seems somewhat improbable. I mean, he really is at the bottom. Nobody's paying attention to him. He doesn't speak much. He doesn't complain about his circumstances. When people in Bologna ask how he's doing, he replies, tranquille, tranquille, and he hides behind that big smile. And it's his most noticeable characteristic, the smile. And other players tease him about it, but always in a friendly way, because this is a little kid whose whole life is about not making enemies, not making anyone angry with him. He hates being noticed. And in fact, if you look at him, he's rare in a top football in that his whole appearance is designed to deflect attention. You know, he's not Jude Bellingham. In our Bellingham episode, we talk about how Jude has a hairdresser who flies in before big games. Kanté does not have that. What he is good at is he listens. He listens to coaches and he absorbs instruction better than most people. Maybe he uses the smile a bit like Roman Abramovich does, if you listen to our Abramovich episode. Abramovich is another little man who grows up among dangerous people in the former Soviet Union. And like Kanté, he uses the smile to ward off attention and to ward off aggression. And like Kanté, is somebody who doesn't like speaking in public, who almost never says anything. And when you think of either man, you think of that smile. Although I think Abramovich is a much darker figure than Kanté, clearly.
Kanté does finally make it into the first team at Boulogne, and he does very, very well. In 2013, when he's just 22 years old, he gets a promotion. He moves up in the footballing world to the French second division with Caen without a transfer fee. But this is a step up for him. Even though he's coming from the bottom, it is progress. Simon, what do some of his teammates at Caen say about him? Because this is when we, I think, start getting far more testimonies about how the guy who we know as N'Golo Kanté sort of starts maturing as a footballer.
Well, one teammate remembers him arriving at training looking like a schoolboy with this little rucksack and one pair of boots, doesn't speak if he can help it, and, the usual reply, how are you doing? Tranquille, tranquille.
One of my favourite stories is from one of the defenders at Caen, Philippe Saud, who invites N'Golo Kanté to his birthday. And even though this is a modest rung of French football, this is a nice event, Kanté turns up to the restaurant on his skateboard. He does not yet have a car, and of course wearing his helmet because he's a very safety-conscious boy, carrying a box of chocolates. But when N'Golo arrives at the restaurant, he realizes that it's quite an opulent affair. And Saud describes N'Golo coming up to him a bit later in the evening and apologizing for the quite modest gift that he's given him. And he says it's because he's never actually been to a birthday party before, which is just warming my cockles.
Yeah, this is tragic. I've seen this actually in our Paris surroundings. Kids at the bottom, they don't come to birthday parties or give birthday parties because the obligation to give presents is unaffordable for them. So the parents don't want them to be invited and can't afford to hold a birthday.
But he eventually ditches the skateboard and gets himself a very luxurious Renault Megane, which I imagine even for French people is a starter pack car, right?
And it's a second-hand Megane Renault, yeah. But still, in his little second-hand Renault, he's the star at Caen. They get promoted to the French First Division, and huge, terrifying event. beIN Sports Television ask him for an interview. Of course, he says no. He says, I can't do a TV interview because I have not proven anything yet.
One of my favourite stories about this period, which is sort of Kanté's breakthrough into the first division of French football, is through one of my old colleagues, Dennis Abbott. And Dennis is a Brussels journalist. He's worked for various British publications in Brussels, and he's also a massive Middlesbrough fan. And in 2013, in pre-season around August, Dennis has watched Kanté play a friendly against Borough, and he takes to Twitter. The tweet still exists to this day. And he says, at Borough, so the official Middlesbrough account, Scouts, please tell Toady #Mowbray to check out #Caen midfielder N'Golo #Kanté before Wenger gets him.
Wenger.
Wenger gets him. Top player. He's an outstanding creative player, winning plaudits from media and players alike. Now, because this is 2013, the Middlesbrough fan account actually replies. And they say to Dennis, passed on to our scouts, thanks, they're going to take a look. Now, we don't know what happened and whether the Middlesbrough scouts actually did pay attention to Dennis.
My guess is no.
Maybe they did, because a lot of clubs did take a look at him, and maybe they looked at him and thought he's not worth the effort. Dennis sadly did miss out on probably being singularly responsible for someone who could have been Middlesbrough's greatest ever players. They, of course, do have a history with diminutive little men. Juninho is one of the first that comes to mind. But, this could have been the power of scouting Twitter if it happened.
Yeah, Middlesbrough would have won the Premier League in 2016 if they'd actually just followed up on that tweet.
What could have happened? But Simon, someone eventually, a so-called big club, do take a punt on N'Golo Kanté when he is 25 years old. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Leicester, I think, have not actually heard of Kanté, but they've spotted him in the match data because he had these crazy numbers for tackles, turnovers, interceptions.
So he's consistently, for the last 2 seasons, including in his first season in Ligue 1, the player that has the most interceptions of any European midfielder in that season, twice in a row.
Yeah, and clubs do look at these data. You don't make decisions based only on data, but if you see something odd in the data, you want to follow that up. So you think, wow, here's a guy who statistically should not be playing for Caen. He should be playing for Chelsea. Why is he at Caen? So you go and have a look and you realize this is the worst mispricing in the modern football talent market. The whole industry has overlooked this brilliant player. The fact that Kanté is playing for Caen until he's 24 means that the entire football world got something massively wrong.
And he says later on in life, I took longer than some people to break through, but I am now proud of it. And it's worth mentioning that Leicester have a bit of a history doing this. It's probably the reason that Riyad Mahrez ends up at Leicester, and Jamie Vardy, who also has a sort of later break in his career to the top flight. They're both going to be very instrumental in that, of course, title-winning season too.
So Kanté drives his second-hand car to Leicester. Nobody there has heard of him. The coach is Claudio Ranieri. Ranieri is watching the first training session, and he later says, this player Kanté was running so hard, I thought he must have a pack full of batteries hidden in his shorts. He never stopped running. So Ranieri tells him, hey, N'Golo, slow down. Don't run after the ball every time, okay? And Kanté, a good boy, says, yes, boss, yes, okay. And then he's doing it again. Ranieri says, one day I'm going to see you cross the ball and then finish the cross with a header yourself. Ranieri can't believe this.
He actually does that. There's a game that Chelsea are playing at West Ham, and N'Golo Kanté makes a misplaced pass. It goes way too ahead of any of him or his teammates. So he runs down to chase his own pass at the byline. So the prophecy came true.
The prophecy happened. Jamie Vardy says Leicester players discover that Kanté has forged a plan to jog to the training ground every day. He doesn't get enough exercise from training, so he wants to run to training. And the players say, no, maybe this is not a good idea. Luckily, NG has upgraded his car. He now has a Mini Cooper, and so he agrees that he will keep driving into training.
A Mini Cooper, the Lamborghini of two-door small cars.
And it will remain his trademark car, rightly so. And on the field, very quickly, the whole Premier League is stunned. You know, Alex Ferguson says he's by far their best player. So Kanté is a kind of roaming defensive midfielder who spots a problem just before it happens and gets there and quashes it before it can become serious. He's like, the Dutch call the role of vacuum cleaner. So he's like this mini vacuum cleaner who's just vacuuming the whole of midfield all the time. Wherever Leicester lose the ball, he wins it back there, makes his very precise interceptions, and he has this gift of tackling on the player's blind side, so the guy with the ball doesn't see him coming. And Vardy says he's so good at tackling that he thinks that training Kanté would sometimes give the ball away on purpose, just for the fun of winning it back again. You mentioned Riyad Mahrez, another kid from the Parisian suburbs. He's just arrived at Leicester, and he finds himself playing in front of Kanté, and he thinks, brilliant, this kid behind me, he does all the defending. He defends for four people. I don't have to defend. So Mahrez just thinks, right, I'm just going to hang up front. Kanté is too shy and polite to do the get back here thing that footballers do. So Kanté says to him, Riyad, maybe come back a little bit, because, you know, he does believe that he shouldn't defend for 11 men, but he's also happy if he has to defend for 11.
He says it in an incredibly polite and civilized way. In fact, you know, one of the most interesting experiences I had watching any football was during COVID, where you could hear players speak on the pitch, and Kanté almost never spoke.
Even on the field, he doesn't speak.
Nope.
Steve Walsh is Leicester's assistant manager, and he famously said, people think we play with two in midfield. And Walsh says, no, we play with Danny Drinkwater in the middle, and we play with Kanté on either side of Drinkwater. So really, we have 12 players on the pitch. I mean, people talk about Kanté as a defensive midfielder, but I actually think that's unfair, because he's also a very good forward passer, and he has this ability to run past opponents with the ball. I wouldn't call it dribbling, because he's so good at observing his opponent that he often just accelerates past the moment the guy is off balance on one side.
He's actually the master of a nutmeg, which is probably the move that you would least associate with someone like N'Golo Kanté, because it's probably the most humiliating thing that you could do. But the number of times I've seen him meg, I think once actually he did a shot where he scored against Tottenham, where he inadvertently megged 3 players with the shot. So, you know, he can do it all.
He observes the balance of the other player brilliantly. One other thing he does is he plays with close to 100% concentration for 90 minutes. And this is something very few players can do.
In his first and only season at Leicester, Kanté is making waves, and that means he also gets a call-up to make his debut for Les Bleus just before the age of 25. Kanté is now a stalwart in the French team, but there are many brilliant stories from his sort of early few forays into the French team by some of his teammates, one of whom is Adil Rami. And he describes that when you join the French national team, everyone has to do a bit of an initiation. At one of these initiation ceremonies, at a barbecue that the players are holding, Kanté's task is to tell a joke, not to sing a song, not to do a dance, but to tell a joke. And he, poor NG, my heart actually breaks telling this story. But he goes on for 15 minutes with this long, elaborate joke. And then when it finally comes to the punchline, he can't remember it. And then he says, well, that's the end of the joke. And everyone falls over themselves laughing.
Yeah, it's the funniest joke they've ever heard, the fact that he can't remember it. So people in the French team tell that story to each other for years after. Rami has another story. Kanté once said to Rami, look, how do you clean your house? And Rami says, well, I have a cleaning lady. And Kanté says, yeah, that kind of makes me feel uneasy. Because Kanté's own mother was a cleaning lady. He's from a place where nobody hired cleaning ladies. And Rami says to him, look, get a cleaning lady, be nice to her, let her play her own music when she cleans, make her feel at home. And she'll probably need the pay, so she'll be happy to do it. So just do it. You'll be doing somebody a service. And so finally, Kanté is convinced, and this Premier League superstar hires a cleaning lady. So he's finally made it to the big time. Everyone finally recognizes his genius. Everybody loves him. Everybody loves the fact that he can't tell a joke properly. And he's playing for France. He's won the Premier League with Leicester, a fairy tale that people in English football will be telling 50 years from now. And then in 2016 comes his big moment. He walks.
He runs very fast.
He runs very fast into Mehreen's life. He joins her beloved Chelsea. Find out the emotional climax of this story after the break.
Are you loving listening to Heroes and Humans every week? Do you hate the wait between our weekly episodes? If so, why not join our official H&H Supporters Club on Patreon? This exclusive community is the place for behind-the-scenes, sneak peeks, Q&A opportunities with me and Simon, and more bonus content. The link is in the episode description and on all our social media bios.
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Simon Cooper.
And me, Mehreen Caen. Welcome back to Heroes and Humans. You join us as we are in 2016 and Leicester have completed perhaps the most improbable triumph in English football with one man at the centre of their midfield. One man or two or three, who knows? N'Golo Kanté. Now, 2015-16 is the only season that N'Golo Kanté spends at Leicester because he then joins my beloved Chelsea. Now, I'll be honest, in the summer of 2016, we've sacked Jose Mourinho, Chelsea are 10th in the league, and this dude with a very good hair transplant called Antonio Conte is about to be our manager. Now, Conte wants to win the league with Chelsea. So what do you do when you want to win the league with a team that was nowhere near winning the league? You take the players from the team that won the league. And Antonio Conte, in all of his wisdom, did recognise that N'Golo Kanté was brilliant.
He makes the mistake of thinking that he also needs Danny Drinkwater with him in midfield, that in some way Drinkwater is intrinsic to Kanté's magic. So they signed them both.
As in a sort of a double pivot. But we very soon realised that N'Golo Kanté doesn't need Danny Drinkwater to be N'Golo Kanté. But we'll skip over the Drinkwater part. Chelsea signed him for, I think, is now a daylight robbery of £35 million, which is incredible to think about when N'Golo Kanté was being moved around in free transfers in French football. And I'll be honest, I was pretty, okay with the signing because I knew that he was great at Leicester, but I was so down on Chelsea at the beginning of that season because we were so crap the season before that I can't lie and say that I was doing cartwheels at the idea of signing this guy.
He has the smallest car in the Chelsea car park, right?
It becomes very clear that when he arrives at Chelsea, which is the big boys kind of team. So I think at Leicester, you could probably get away with being a bit zany and having a slightly crappy car because you're sort of with journeyman footballers, people like Jamie Vardy, and you've achieved something incredible that no one thought you would do. But Chelsea is a team that's won the Champions League. Chelsea is a team that win FA Cups. We've got superstars like Eden Hazard and Cesc Fabregas in this team.
Move on from the Chelsea thing.
I'm just saying, we were great.
He has the smallest car in the car park. When they play Leicester, when he's with Chelsea, Kanté goes to visit his old teammates at the end of the match. And Jamie Vardy says to him, mate, are you still driving that Mini Cooper? And Kanté says, no, the Mini Cooper I had at Leicester, I sent back to France, probably, sent it to a friend or a relative. And I bought a new Mini Cooper. So he's gone up in the world. His Mini Coopers get newer and better.
And when he left Chelsea last year, that Mini Cooper was ambushed by fans as he drove it out of the stadium. And I remember looking at it and it's completely bashed up. Like it's got no front bumper left. The lights don't work, but it is that Mini Cooper. He reminds me a little bit of when we signed this other sort of unsung hero at Chelsea, which is huge, massive Brazilian defender called Alex, who signed his...
I remember him, great player at PSV Eindhoven, yeah.
He was a brilliant... Yeah, he was at PSV Eindhoven. That's where we signed him from. And he does his big kind of like signing ceremony at Stamford Bridge. And then he leaves the stadium on the bus outside the bridge. And I thought, this guy's a bit of a chip off the old block. So Kanté was giving me a bit of Alex vibes at the beginning.
I think it's partly because Kanté was not rich until his 20s. And he feels, I think, a discomfort with wealth. He feels he doesn't deserve it. He knows very well the other world in which people are poor. And so he doesn't want to have a Lamborghini. That seems to me to explain this, in part, this humility. And perhaps it's also part of his Islamic faith. I'm not sure.
When Chelsea offer him all of the blandishments and all of the creative tax tools, accounting tools that they offer all of his players, Simon.
To be paid in part through an offshore tax haven, very Chelsea.
He says no.
Yeah, he says, no, I just want to be paid a normal way. He's instantly brilliant at Chelsea. They win the Premier League in 2017, you probably recall. He's the league's player of the year, and he runs more miles than any other player in the Premier League except Christian Eriksen. Eden Hazard, his teammate at Chelsea, calls him the rat because he moves everywhere so fast. And it's part of the Kanté story. Every team he goes to from Bologna to Chelsea gets better than before he was there.
And when he leaves, of course, Leicester have a pretty tough second season post-Premier League. And I can now say with a great amount of hindsight that since Kanté has left Chelsea, we have been a literal shadow of our former selves. And there are so many incredible stories about Kanté's life living in London, the big lights of London. And Simon, you're going to tell us, I think, one of the best I've ever heard about any footballer.
Yeah, I think this may be the archetypal N'Golo Kanté story. So one evening, he has to take the Eurostar from London to Paris, misses the last train. So what does he do? He Googles the nearest mosque. He's a religious Muslim, and he goes to the mosque, meets people there. Somebody invites him to their home. I think it's an Arsenal fan, invites him to his home. So they have rice and curry. They play FIFA. They watch Match of the Day. And Kanté is quite bothered because he wants to wash his own plate. He feels, he should wash his plate. And the host says, no, you're not going to wash your plate here. We will wash your plate. It's just a beautiful evening. The Arsenal fan says, you would never know that this guy was a Premier League star. I don't think you get many other Chelsea players doing this sort of thing.
Okay, so I've been in a position where I've missed the last Eurostar, and what I do is I want to punch myself in the face. I'm extremely frustrated and I want to go home. But I've thought about how this story plays out. And the way I think it happens is that he's just too polite to say no. So he goes, he does his prayers. If you imagine you're in central London at your local mosque and there's a multi-million-dollar amazing world-class footballer who's just sitting on the prayer mats next to you, you probably might go up to him a little bit, ask him for a selfie. But maybe I think when you see someone as disarming as Kanté, you think, oh, he probably wants to hang out with us because he's just not going to say no. So I don't know how much coercion was actually involved in this story.
And then he's there and he feels, well, I can't leave now because it would be rude. So he has to play FIFA and watch Match of the Day.
So obliging.
But meanwhile, behind the scenes, it's a very difficult period for him because his agents, or people who claim to be his agents, are falling out over who is actually his agent. And one day in 2017, he's sitting in a restaurant in the Paris suburbs when a guy comes in with a gun and points it at his knee. Kanté is briefly held prisoner, and the guy says he'll shoot Kanté's knee if Kanté doesn't leave his agent. It seems that there's a dispute between agents over who owns the rights to Kanté. One of the agents got nearly 5 million euros when Kanté moved to Chelsea, and others were stiffed and were unhappy about it. All this is happening at a time when Kanté's mother is still working as a cleaning lady. So the kind of financial situation around Kanté is extremely bizarre. And I guess he's such a nice guy that he can't say no to people. So if you come up and say, oh, I'm your agent, he's not going to tell you otherwise.
Yeah, and I mean, in the same way that if you come up to him and invite him to your house to play FIFA, he'll say yes, but he's also preyed upon by quite a rapacious industry. I mean, footballers, football agents, there's huge amounts of money to be made. And we've seen this with stories of, Paul Pogba getting blackmailed. I think that's the kind of dark side of being this type of character and this type of game which is so lucrative.
Yeah, especially if you come from a family and an environment that's very poor, where a lot of people desperately want some of the money that you have, and where there isn't a kind of strong figure in the family who takes control of the money the way that Leo Messi's dad did. I guess Kanté was very much fatherless and on his own, suddenly attracting millions and millions of pounds, and everybody wants a piece of it. But it doesn't seem to hamper him on the field at all. On the field, he's able to have this 100% concentration. He goes to the World Cup with France.
It's actually quite a sad time for him, that incredible tournament, because only a couple of weeks beforehand, Kanté's older brother dies very suddenly of a heart attack. And this is something that, even though he doesn't speak about too much, I remember at Chelsea, maybe a few months after the World Cup, he faints in a training session and he becomes incredibly paranoid that he may also be living with some sort of congenital condition. That means that he could ultimately just drop dead at any moment. However, it does not distract him from that tournament, a tournament where you were there, Simon, following Les Bleus.
Yeah, and also following the brilliant jokes on French social media, like Kanté doesn't pay for his electricity, he produces it.
One of my favorites is 71% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. The other 29% is covered by N'Golo Kanté.
The French fans have this song for him. I'm not going to sing it, but it goes, N'Golo.
Shall I sing it?
Yeah, you sing it, yeah.
Listener warning, if you're wearing headphones, take them out. I don't want you to hear this too intently. But the song goes, and this builds up, right? So it goes, N'Golo Kanté, ba la 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 la. N'Golo Kanté, ba la 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 la. Much louder. Il est petit, il est gentil, il a bouffé Leo Messi. And over and over and over and over again. And this is like the theme song for that triumphant team, where I think Paul Pogba is always at the front of rallying the song to get N'Golo Kanté sitting on people's shoulders and like crowd surfing, because he never wants to do it. But it's still sung to this day. I heard it just before the quarterfinals in France.
The French fans have revived it. I mean, just for the few listeners we have who don't speak French, the lyrics are balala, balala, and then he is small, he is nice, he ate Leo Messi, all of which is correct. Pogba encourages this other line, which he gets fans to sing along to, but we all know that he's a cheater, because one of the jokes in the French team is that Kanté cheats at cards, which may actually be factually correct.
He is a superstar of the World Cup song for the French national team, which is this kind of Afrobeats track, which is written by this guy called Veggie Dream. It's a song which names all of the players in the squad, but the main part of the chorus is actually N'Golo Kanté. And when they win the World Cup, the players love this song. This song is everywhere. So every time, you're mentioned in the song, every player has this little dance that they do, in their own version of the song. But when Kanté's name is done, obviously he doesn't have a dance. So they have to kind of lift him, hoist him on his shoulders, and everyone sings his name.
Because he refuses to dance.
He has no idea how to celebrate. I've never seen him celebrate a goal. I've never seen him celebrate a win. He just doesn't know what to do with himself.
He hates attention. And one of the problems when you score or when you win the World Cup is people look at you, which is for him this nightmare. So he doesn't actually lift the World Cup trophy. Maybe it's because he's shy. Maybe he doesn't want to be in the photo of lifting the trophy. So he lets the other players do it.
And this is a French team that become a social media phenomenon. You see them like dabbing all the time, and they go to the Elysee and Pogba's there like dabbing French President Emmanuel Macron. And I will admit that when they go for the ceremonies after the World Cup is won, all the players are getting, this incredible honor, the Légion d'honneur from the French president, the highest medal for, services to the French state. And when N'G's name is called by Macron and he's just sitting there like not making eye contact, and he steps forward and the president puts it on his lapel, I did shed a bit of a tear. I thought it was an incredible moment.
And then at Chelsea, you guys win the Champions League in 2021. He's voted the best player in both semis and in the final against Man City.
And before that, in the knockout rounds, when Chelsea are playing Atletico Madrid, the great Diego Simeone's Atletico Madrid, Kanté records the highest number of interceptions made by a single player in a match at 13. There are so many moments in the Champions League final that I look back on and think, gosh, this was such a special team and he's such a special player.
Is this the most important match in your life?
No, 2012, the first time we won it, is the most important match in my life, because winning your first Champions League is like no other. You wouldn't know that because you don't support a team.
Ajax won the Champions League in my lifetime in 1995. But anyway, let's move.
Yeah, 1995.
You were saying there's this moments in the final.
Yeah, I mean, that game, of course, which looms large in my memory, is a game that Chelsea have absolutely no right to win. We're playing the great Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. We sacked our manager in January. Frank Lampard. Thomas Tuchel comes in, improbably gets us to a Champions League final. And before the game, there is a lot of hype about the fact that Pep Guardiola messes it all up. So he does something completely crazy. Man City have been almost unbeatable in this entire season by playing two players in midfield, the great Rodri and the great Fernandinho. But before the Champions League final, I remember getting the lineups on Twitter and there's no Rodri and there's no Fernandinho. He's playing Gundogan and Bernardo Silva in the centre of midfield. And this ends up being a ridiculous moment of overthinking from Pep. And now, I think, with hindsight, I'm thinking, does he realise that he's going to be facing someone like Kanté, so he has to switch something up in the middle because they know they might be losing the ball a little bit more, or they might be losing control. Eventually, as we know, it doesn't work out for Pep. Kanté has an incredible final. There's many moments in the final, but the one that really sticks out to me, and I watch this game every day, the full 95 minutes.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Is in the second half when Mahrez, Kanté's former teammate, picks up the ball in the centre of the pitch. I'm worried because Mahrez is kind of gliding through the centre of the pitch, and he's sort of repelling anyone that's coming near him. And you know that he's just trying to find an angle at which he can score from goal about 15 yards out. And N'Golo's sort of watching him do this, and he's hanging around and he's not making a tackle. And he waits and waits and waits, and then he toe pokes the ball and wins it off Mahrez. And Mahrez keeps running in the same direction he's going in because he doesn't realise that he's lost the ball to Kanté, who's already like 15 yards up the pitch and trying to set up a counter-attack.
Well, Kanté was waiting for the moment when Mahrez was onside, and he was waiting for that blindside moment, which is when Kanté strikes.
Yeah, to misquote a very famous Zlatan Ibrahimovic moment, he sent Riyad Mahrez to get a hot dog. There's also, he does loads of things in that game. One of which is a goal-saving header from Ruben Diaz in the box. So this is not just about him making interceptions. He's everywhere on the pitch.
Ruben Diaz is twice his height, literally.
I see him once we've won the game, he's giving an interview. He has to give an interview because he's player of the match. And what I noticed about him is perhaps a bit like Prince Andrew's genetics. N'Golo Kanté doesn't even sweat. Maybe one final amazing stat to round off his Chelsea career is that throughout his time in English football, so that's a season with Leicester and 6 seasons with Chelsea, despite the position that he plays, he never, ever gets a red card. Crazy.
And Thomas Tuchel, the Chelsea coach, says he is our Van Dijk, our Virgil van Dijk, our Kevin De Bruyne, our Neymar, our Kylian Mbappe. It's him who makes the difference, which is not something you often hear about a defensive midfielder. Phil Foden of City names Kanté as his toughest opponent ever. Foden says he's just everywhere. You think you've got away from him, but he's always just by your side. He does everything. He runs everywhere. And also he transforms the way a team plays, because when Kanté's there, other players feel free to go forward, knowing this guy can police the midfield by himself. He's the vacuum cleaner.
Thierry Henry says that the first time he met Kanté, he went up to him and he poked him in the chest because he had to check if he was real.
I think Youssouf Fofana recently...
Oh, Youssouf Fofana does that in the changing rooms, yeah.
Yeah, he's giving this monologue about, I heard these legends about Les Bleus, I heard these stories about incredible things, and now I see it's all true. This is about Kanté. And while Fofana's doing this speech, Kanté walks into the changing room. He's man of the match against Austria, beginning of the tournament. And the other players applaud him. Didier Deschamps hugs him. And Kanté smiles, he shakes people's hands, but he doesn't say a word. And of course, he's hoping they're going to move on to talk about something else.
He's going to hate this podcast, by the way. Angie, I'm really sorry. Angie, I'm very, very sorry that we're doing this. But, you don't have to listen if you want. Just listen to it on 2x speed. That's what I do.
He wasn't even meant to be at the Euro, because as he enters his 30s, he starts picking up injuries. His last 2 seasons at Chelsea, he doesn't play much. And it looks like, this is how the career ends. The body falls apart. There's no way back. He goes to Saudi Arabia, which is like the entry portal to death in football theology. He joins the club where Karim Benzema plays, Al-Ittihad. His salary is 25 million euros net a season, and then 100 million over 3 seasons in commercial and sponsorship rights. I truly hope this money is going to him and his family, and probably to relatives they support in Mali, and not to agents. But given Kanté's backstory, it's hard to be sure about this. Another weird financial event is that around the time he moves to Saudi, he buys a Belgian 3rd division club called Virton, or Virton, I don't know if it's in Dutch or French. Now, buying a football club does not sound like Kanté, so I hope this isn't some crazy agent's scheme. Yeah,
we don't know, to be honest. We are speculating at this point. What is true is that his end at Chelsea is very sad. It definitely ends with a whimper. He never really gets a chance to say goodbye to the fans. He has to put out this kind of like anodyne statement on Instagram, like we don't get to clap him off the pitch at Stamford Bridge, for example. But there are a couple of things that are still uniquely N'Golo Kanté, and the one that sticks out in my mind is before he joins Al-Ittihad, he goes on Hajj. He does the holy pilgrimage that Muslims are meant to do at least once in his life. in Saudi Arabia, in Makkah and Medina. And N'Golo Kanté is seen with one of his future teammates, Ismail Bennassir, who's been injured. And they're doing the pilgrimage together. And N'Golo's holding his friend's crutches for him. He snapped in Hajj. He doesn't take the photo himself, like a lot of players who spend a lot of time taking selfies while they're on pilgrimage. And you just see this figure with his mate performing a very grueling physical pilgrimage. And the fact that I think he's holding his friend's crutches just kind of, again, encapsulates the kind of guy that he is.
You are perhaps the most avid social media person I have ever encountered. Do you see Angie much on social media?
I'm just the youngest person that you've ever met. That's not actually true. His last tweet is in 2019, and whether or not he manages his own social media, I doubt, but it's something that he has to do for his sponsors, Adidas. So it's kind of like this sort of cloying sponsorship post that he does. He's almost never on Instagram. I think the French national team have told him to revive his Instagram. You don't see him sharing stories. You don't see him going out with his boys. Everything that's posted about N'Golo Kanté on social media is done so by his colleagues, of whom he is completely beloved too.
Now, weirdly, in Saudi Arabia, he recovers as a footballer. He played the whole league season there. He seems to have found his old form. And to general surprise, when Didier Deschamps announces the French squad for the tournament, NG is in it. And people think, well, okay, making up the numbers.
They thought it was a pity selection, right?
Well, France are a bit desperate and just, see if this old guy still has something, maybe last 20 minutes of matches. But then in the France training camp, they noticed this statistical oddity. The team that NG is in training sessions always wins. Weird, huh? So Deschamps, Deschamps knows him, of course, very well, coached the World Cup team in 2018. Deschamps gives him a go in a friendly against Canada. And within about 10 minutes, it's unthinkable that NG could ever be left out of the team again.
And this is a team with Tchouaméni and Camavinga and all these incredible young superstars playing in the best leagues in world football. But you still need to have a Kanté in there.
Footballers are very quick to realise who is the best player. And this tournament for France, it has been Kanté. French fans are delirious. Their favourite player, the memories of 2018, France still can't score any goals. But with Kanté, they barely concede. In the first 5 Euro matches, they let in just one goal from a Robert Lewandowski penalty.
And he sort of defied that, I guess, stereotypical thing that once you get into your 30s, you can't run as fast. As a defensive midfielder, you have to get cleverer with your positioning, etc., etc. But actually, he's still playing like he always used to play. And this is very high-paced, intervention-based pressing football. He's still the Kanté he was when he was 25, which I think is incredible and does break all of these sort of maxims we have about how older players get slower and have to change the way they play. He hasn't changed the way he plays. He still plays exactly like he does, and nobody else can do it quite as well as him.
Well, Johan Cruyff, who of course invented football, would say he seems quick because he thinks quick. He sees what's going to happen, and so he gets there early. But that's the speed of brain as much as it is speed of foot. So let's look at this guy's legacy. I mean, what's curious to me is the love that he inspires, not just from you. Why so much love? And is there an uncomfortable aspect to this, that fans love this player who never speaks and looks like a child and is humble, who has no tattoos, who never asserts himself? I mean, look, I understand that there's some nostalgia for the old days before footballers were superstars in Ferraris, but is there something darker going on? Is he some kind of racist ideal of the good black player who just doesn't speak and does his work? Or am I reading too much into this? Am I being some kind of crazy fake sociologist?
You're always a crazy fake sociologist, so that's okay because that's part of the unique contributions of this podcast. But I guess I can't really speak for what the racists think about him, but here's how I kind of, rationalize the importance of Kanté. And so you mentioned that he's shy and he's non-assertive, and these are all qualities that you can put to Leo Messi. And Leo Messi is a couple of years older than him, but we know everything about Leo Messi's life. Every part of Leo Messi's life, including the myths and the apocryphal stories, are all written down and they are poured over by his fans. If you're a fan of N'Golo Kanté like me, you basically don't really know that much about him at all. I couldn't even tell you who he was married to and whether he's got any kids. I just don't know. The only part of N'Golo Kanté that I know is the snippets that we see on the pitch and very, very few that we see off it. And then I guess there's the other counterpoint, which is that listeners may have realized that I'm an incredibly cynical and wizened person. And there is...
Except when it comes to Kanté.
Except when it comes to Kanté. And I feel like he should be protected at all costs. And I will say this, that as a Muslim, I think that he is among the best of us, that he embodies the values of modesty and being humble and hardworking. He talks about the fact that he's a Muslim and ultimately his religion means more to him than any parts of his professional life and his personal life. It reminds me a little bit about the figure of Jurgen Klopp, who's also said this, that, Jurgen Klopp is able to contextualize his life so much and not take everything so seriously because he's a man of faith. And there is something about that Kanté has. And again, he has that magic ingredient, authenticity, the thing that everyone really wants, but very few people have in this sort of modern fake world. And I think it's a confluence of all these things that mean that I am incredibly drawn to him as a person. And that's despite all of the footballing stuff.
I think that's the most beautiful thing you've ever said.
On this podcast.
No, total. What would he have been if not a footballer?
So, Simon, you think you've got some thoughts?
I mean, I don't mean this to sound at all demeaning, because I don't mean it demeaning. But I could see him as a garbage collector like his dad, and the way he apparently started out when he didn't think he was going to make it in football. A kind of non-speaking public servant. That seems to me a very N'Golo Kanté role.
That question about what N'Golo Kanté would have been doing is become a bit more poignant because we're speaking after the end of parliamentary elections in France, where one of the big three parties on the far right had a campaigning platform where future N'Golo Kantés wouldn't even be playing for the French football team because they'd be barred from holding French nationality, because N'Golo is born in France, but his parents were not born in France. And these are the types of people that the Front National or the Rassemblement National don't want holding French citizenship. Thankfully, they didn't win that election, although I imagine some of these policies might rear their head every time there is an election in France. What do I think he would have done? Given the environment in France, I think he probably would have come to the UK and tried to find a better life for himself rather than sticking around as a garbage collector like his dad.
And we always ask, would you like to hang out with this person? I think in your case, the answer is yes, but would you die of happiness if you got to play FIFA with him one day after mosque?
Now we're delving into my deepest, darkest fantasies. Let's just say that yes, I would like to spend an evening with N'Golo Kanté. You, Simon?
We wouldn't be able to talk. I mean, he wouldn't speak at all. He would just smile at me. I would feel ill at ease. If there were no visuals of N'Golo Kanté, he wouldn't exist. He's like Charlie Chaplin. He exists without a soundtrack.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms.
Next week's episode is on Sepp Blatter, president of FIFA for 17 very controversial years. How did the short king rule football for 17 years, and is he unfairly maligned or as bad as people say? Be sure to check it out.
This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.